liftoff. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs The Con. This is my 763rd Truth Bomb riff over the course of the last 4 years, and I am so pleased to introduce my guests, a person who's very well known in the Salt Lake Valley, but maybe not so much to you nationwide, but I think you're fundamentally going to get a deep appreciation for what my guest, Sarah Buck, is going to bring to this dialogue. Now, I met Sarah Buck last summer during, well, I should say last spring, initially during the No Kings 50501 initiative that took place in the springtime that was in response to what was happening with all things the Trump administration, specifically Doge. And I quickly was, I'd say, enamored when I got a chance to see Sarah speak in front of about 10,000 people in Salt Lake City, and she delivered a very eloquent and a very moving and riveting closing speech to that particular event. It wasn't much longer that I attended the Bernie Sanders and AOC, I think we called it the anti-oligarchy tour or something to that effect.
Right.
And Sarah took to the stage in front of, I think, a full house at the local basketball arena at the University of Utah, which, I mean, approximately 10 to 12,000 people in that particular arena. And she introduced both AOC and Bernie Sanders. And I thought to myself, this is a woman who's been around the block in Salt Lake City and Utah in terms of organizing, and she knows her way around what's happening. And lo and behold, I happened to run into her not too long later, where there was a organized protest in the wake of a lot of ICE raids, and that had local impact in Salt Lake City. And that's when I met Sarah. And one thing led to another. We started a dialogue, and we haven't stopped since. And I have been absolutely engaged and enthralled with the efforts of Salt Lake Indivisible because as the nation has responded to all things ICE, particularly most recently in Minneapolis, the Salt Lake contingent has consistently been enormous for a relatively mid-level city that I think people around the country associate with all things LDS, conservative, maybe Trump republicanism, all of which are true. But what they're not aware of is really how democratic, how progressive, quite frankly, how activated Salt Lake City and northern Utah are amidst the perception. And I think a lot of that, a great deal of that, has to do with Sarah Buck and her team. And Sarah, as I turn this to you, we are in a very precarious moment as a nation. Obviously, we've seen unbelievable efforts by the Trump administration to turn everything that we thought we held, true in this country by way of the law and the Constitution and certain inalienable rights that have all been pretty much thrown on their head. And throughout all of these different existential crises, and they come at us so fast and furious in what Steve Bannon called flood the zone, but with incredible consequences. Now we're in a war with Iran, which I think a lot of people have been predicting and seeing on the wall for, quite frankly, over the course of the last 25 years, particularly in light of Iraq. But this on top of all of the incredible initiatives of ICE and what that means and detentions and all of those things that we're responding to. In addition, just the type of decision making that would gut education, that would gut social safety nets, that would get inside Social Security within Doge, and the litany could go on. And especially, we see everybody who attends these rallies, not just here but across the country. You see incredible poetry of what the problems are on all the signs, and sometimes it's a little more difficult to express that. But boy, do you feel it when you see it all around you. And so, I guess the first question I would like to understand, based on your initiative and your structure and your organization, particularly in light to the threat of our elections, can you kind of start and frame in terms of your initiative and priorities of you and your organization, what you're actually prioritizing and how you're responding and how you're organizing?
Sure. I'm going to go back just a little bit to that you gave me credit for the activation in Salt Lake. And I'm going to say I think that our legislature is primarily responsible for the activation. I think when you live, for those who don't know, we are a blue dot in a very red state, and there's a supermajority here. And I think living under that oppressive um, structure and the way that they continually try to take power from the people is really what has activated a lot of people. And I think that was really confirmed for me in this last legislative session. There were people who showed up for almost every hearing. Sometimes as many as 300 people were in a hearing room. People are, I think, that often what happens with repression is just the opposite of what the intention is. And that honestly, that's a really good sign of a pretty healthy democracy, that the people push back. And I think we've seen that the people push back here through, propositions, through all of the legal means that we have. And I'm not going to say that we always win, but I do think that there are things that are happening that show that we're still healthy as a democracy, and that people are aware of the power grabs that are happening at both the state and national level. And I think that is one of the hopeful signs in all of this. We don't have enough people yet. That 3.5 isn't magic, but it is an indicator, and it's a big number, even though it sounds like a small number. To assemble that many people really is a big calling. But you mentioned voter rights, which really dovetails right into this. Everyone recognizes that we have a midterm election coming up, and that elections matter. I mean, we're in this position we're in because of an election. And that because this regime that we currently have has become unpopular, they're floating the idea that maybe some of these states need to have national involvement in their elections, which has never happened. They're floating the idea that, do we even need elections? I mean, Trump has said that. So all sides understand that this upcoming election is very important. And there, in our own state, there were a lot of concerns that there were going to be major changes made to our very successful vote by mail. And why would they change that? We've had, to my knowledge, 20 plus years of increased success using vote by mail, and it has increased the number of people who participate. Well, that might be why they would change that. Because I think one of the signs we see from this administration is they don't want everyone voting. And so some of the things were really, we were just having a conversation today, and since our legislature has just finished up, the worst things that they were trying to do with the vote by mail didn't happen, but they did make some changes. And we need to have a really full understanding of that before we create our kind of public awareness campaign. But I think the public awareness campaign is coming, and it's my understanding it's going to be, well, I'll just say here are the concerns. The concerns are that there will be intimidation at the polls. So to me, the most obvious thing is vote by mail. But there have also been changes to the vote by mail on a national level from the post office that may make that more difficult for us to encourage people to do. So then it may be you'll get your ballot by mail, you'll fill it out, and you'll take it to an approved drop box. But there's concern about intimidation at those places as well. So one of the things we're working on getting together is, poll watchers or legal observers, because I think we're going to need them in this election cycle.
Do you
and I say that.
Oh, I'm sorry, just to insert a quick question. Do you anticipate that it'll be ICE, or do you anticipate that it'll be like federal agents, or do you anticipate, because we are a deep red state and there are
National Guard.
Okay, do you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, Patrick, like, I never envisioned we would be in this place. Even when Trump was reelected, I did not anticipate it being this quick and this illegal and this corrupt and this just so many things.
Yeah, no, it staggers the mind, and it's hard. And I know, look, I got to be honest with you. The day of the election, I remember waking up the next morning and discovering, the Republicans got both houses of Congress, this on top of already having the Supreme Court and kind of the initiative. And I already was scratching my head about anomalies in the election. I'm thinking to myself, we are in for it. And boy, lo and behold, have we, just they've thrown the kitchen sink at us. And we know on the other side of this war, and we'll get to that in a minute, that there could be even worse things to come, God forbid. But the long and the short of it is that you have responded. Your team has responded. The people of Salt Lake City have responded. Just really quickly before we continue to go down this path, I want to share my screen just so people in other states can get a sense from just some of these pictures. Salt Lake City has grown immeasurably, immensely, I should try to say, over the course of the last decade. I think we've doubled in population in northern Utah. So there's a lot of people from around the country, particularly, the Bay Area, that have become residents of Utah now. But if you look at some of these pictures, and you can just see the streets overwhelmingly crowded. I know that, we've seen as high as, 10, 15, even maybe closer to 20,000. And I just want to share this one Instagram photo, and forgive the expletive on the sign, but you can see our beautiful Wasatch Mountains in the background, just to kind of set the table. But it was really in every single case, all the way through just 3 weeks ago with the Minneapolis situation. Just unbelievably, every single time you guys have organized and gotten people out there, the crowds have been absolutely massive. They've been absolutely energized and, in welcoming. And it's just like, it is truly this bold, unbelievably declaration of the people of Utah, that no, we don't accept this. And, it is, to your point, that the vibrancy, the hope, that it's far from over, and we're not going to let it get there. And that's thanks to you. But to return to the idea of martial law, right? We were obviously, we're a red state. Like you said, we're a blue dot, a very significant blue dot in a very red state. But what ICE has done is deployed into blue states and blue cities and sanctuary cities and all of those things. So we haven't had to go toe to toe with ICE like they did in LA, like they did in Chicago, like they did in DC. And then ultimately the worst aspect of it, because of Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy's murders, especially in 20 below degree weather. It's shocking how unbelievably effective and, shall we say, courageous the folks of Minneapolis have been. But I dare say to the people that are watching this from around the country, Utah is something to keep your eye on. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Do you want to comment on that going further, especially as we, move into other subjects?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the reasons we'll have problems here is we're set to deliver a Democrat to the House of Representatives because of a, a proposition that the people got onto the ballot. It passed in 2018, and I laugh because it hasn't been enacted yet. It's been stuck in courts. It's been stuck in all kinds of ridiculous things that it's, this proposition process was designed for the people to get things that our legislators were ignoring. It was no small task. We actually got three propositions passed in 2018. Our legislature rewrote all three of them. One, the proposition to end gerrymandering, actually found plaintiffs and sued them. And so that one moved forward. And our Utah Supreme Court, which is Republican appointed and approved, unanimously said the legislature had overstepped and that they had mishandled that and kicked it back down to the lower courts. And so it's been a ridiculously long process, and they're still trying to figure out a way to keep it from going through. And they did some things actually in this last cycle, but I do think we're going to field and seat a Democrat because Salt Lake City is overwhelmingly, and Salt Lake County is a pretty strong Democratic hold in the state. And the thing that's really frustrating, it shouldn't just frustrate Salt Lake that they do this. When they cut Salt Lake into four pieces and put us in all four districts, they make it difficult. Number one, they make it difficult for someone from the rural areas to become a representative because the rural district is competing all across the length of the state, is what they've done, because the southern part of Utah is more rural. And for them to cut us in four, they've had to kind of cut our state into four long lines almost. And so nobody's being well represented is the truth of the matter. It isn't just Salt Lake. It affects all of our communities. And there's no question that a rural community has very different priorities than a city. And so it shouldn't just offend Salt Lake. It should offend the entire state that they're choosing their voters instead of us choosing our representatives. And that our representatives aren't necessarily from our area because our area isn't a representative area.
Well, but I gotta be honest with you. I haven't paid that much attention to local politics over the course of many years because I was traveling and I lived in Park City and I was kind of more in the national scenario. And I just kind of figured Utah is going to do what Utah does. But I'll tell you, the last cycle, it was clearly evident to me that the billionaire class was handpicking a bunch of the most incompetent people to run for office that had absolutely no issues. They overwhelmed, the airwaves with tons of money and spending on cultural polarizing issues of which nothing made any sense. And they steamrolled getting this massive majority. Whereas, again, to your point, Salt Lake County specifically, it's got a lot of very smart people. It's got a lot of bright people. I mean, there's high tech. There's the University of Utah has tremendous medical. I mean, there's just a lot of bright people in this place, right? They know their stuff and they're professionals. They're not easily, bowled over. But because of this gerrymandering and all of these other techniques, how would you characterize? I mean, it just doesn't it seem so diabolical to you how this whole operation works between what I just mentioned about finding really horrible representatives that literally have nothing to stand on that can steamroll because of these gerrymandered sort of scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, it's been super frustrating to watch. Like Burgess Owens.
Yeah, that's exactly who I was.
He's a really good example. And honestly, he's a nice person. I've met him. He's a nice person. He clearly played a lot of football and took a lot of hits. And I'm not, I mean, honestly, that's really, if you spend much time with him, you really do come to that conclusion.
So you're taking the notion to exactly, they'll do whatever it takes. Yeah.
And, he didn't live in the district he ran in. He hadn't lived in the state. It's really kind of sad. And I say that, and then, what gives me hope? Gosh, we have our newest representative at the state level was someone you met when you spoke, was the teacher, John Arthur.
Yeah.
Filled an open position. And oh my gosh, to listen to him in this legislative session, he runs circles around so many of them because he actually is exposed to the things that they're wanting to control. He's a teacher in a low income area school. And he could speak to immigration. He could speak to these education bills. And he does it. I mean, he is so compassionate and so well informed. And I know they fear people like John Arthur, because it's hard to disagree with someone who is so grounded in the community and empowered by making people's lives better, not by power itself.
That's a tremendous way to describe it, and I appreciate that. And of course, just so antithetical on what we need in communities and democracy against this power play by this big money matrix that's tied to a lot of stuff that obviously I want to address soon. But moving forward, the notion of Indivisible, which you've been a part of for some time, and the National Indivisible Group, I wonder if you can maybe speak towards the organization, the efforts, the hope, everything moving forward, particularly as we approach March, which I understand there's going to be a very large national initiative.
Yeah, so National Indivisible came about when Trump was elected the first time, and really it was a resistance movement. And, Trump pulled a lot of antics in his first 4 years, and especially in the first 2 years. And then he lost a lot of power in the midterms. And I say that because they know why these midterms are really important, and they're not looking good for the Republican Party. So
yeah, the polls, they're really in the dirt.
Yeah. So anyway, when Biden got elected, a lot of the indivisible groups went away, but we didn't, because we were working on a lot of state issues, to be honest, because we do have a lot of things happen. I mean, we were super involved in the Prop 4 and then in defending it. There are always places to get involved on a state level, but we've always maintained the contact with national and worked in tandem with them on things, and they're very supportive. But they don't tell us how to run our groups or what we should be doing. And truly, given the way this administration came out of the blocks on January 20th, I think we're really lucky that there was this organizational structure in place. And it has amped up at a level that's pretty remarkable over the last year.
What we got millions? There were up to 11 to 13 million, I think, in both of the major campaigns over the summertime.
Yeah, well, and those are people showing up for protests. But what Indivisible's doing, in addition to that, that's the once every couple of months they organize that. But we have weekly calls where there are calls to action, where they help explain. Our form of government is complicated.
Yeah.
And so to actually be able to work to affect change, you have to understand what you're trying to change.
That's right.
And I think it's one of the best things they do are these weekly meetings, because the couple that run it were former staffers, and they're very good at explaining the process and explaining the strategies. And so the more you understand, the better you are at creating a response, right? A response that works. And so they were probably the first group to to put pressure on Schumer about um, the shutting down the government over the healthcare stuff. And I'll add, they said, if you guys cave on this, we'll help primary folks, and that is what's going to happen. And it's interestingly, it's not just happening with Democrats. Several Republicans lost their primaries just last week.
Yeah.
So the primaries are definitely moving forward and already affecting change. And from my understanding, the House could lose their Republican majority before the midterms, based on what's happening right now.
That's
And
that's interesting.
if not outright lose it, these folks who have lost their primaries may be folks that they can now lean on to do the right thing.
So you know as well as anybody how difficult it is to galvanize specific issues that everybody really can find agreement on specifically in massive ways. One of those issues that have come up in the last week is the war in Iran. How is that resonating with your efforts and the community as well as what you might be hearing nationally?
Well, I don't think war is ever popular. But I also think that we're weirdly capable of moving along as though nothing has changed in the world. And I think it's almost, I guess, I don't know if you know this of my background. My husband was in the Navy for 20 years.
Wow.
And so I was a Navy wife. And honestly, the way that this administration is abusing and using our military is like it tears me up to watch, and is mind blowing to me. The fact that we're attacking boats in international water and saying, well, they're drug runners. That is, to me, what they're doing is an act of war. That's not what we do with drug runners. We board the boat, we arrest people, and we try them. And what's been happening for several months now, more than 60 days, more than that war powers, emergency powers are given, is they're not just blowing up these people. Then we get reports that they're leaving survivors in the water or coming back around with more bombs. They're using military aircraft and making it look like commercial aircraft. All of these things are against, I know it's weird that we have rules about war, but we do. And we're violating them. Do you know who else violated those rules? Germany.
Well, I was going to say, well, I mean, and then
actually a lot of them came out of what happened. We recognized that we needed, codified how you behave in a war. And so I don't know that many Americans understand how shocking that is.
Yeah.
And how out of the norm that is. A very high-ranking admiral resigned within 15 minutes.
Right.
And that tells you he understood. He understood that what he was being asked to be part of was illegal. And, it continues. There are reports of a boat that was involved, an Iranian boat that was involved in a training exercise with India that was attacked by us last weekend. And it killed like 67 people and like 30 people were left in the water. And Sri Lanka came and rescued them.
It's so remarkable. and I'm so glad you revealed that. But so, for example, my dad's side of the family, his dad was in the military. My dad was in the Merchant Marines, but he was also a naval officer. And his entire life was to run a tight ship, right? So there's this notion of principles and character and service and loyalty, and those things matter. And so when Donald Trump has been breaking the law for decades, has gotten away with it, and then we've seen this slippery slope into madness that we'll address momentarily, particularly as it relates to the Epstein files and the Epstein class. And this guy, of course, deferred service 5 times because of, his whatever, with his ankles. I'm trying to think of the exact terminology.
Bone spurs.
Bone spurs, pardon me. Bone spurs and all those tricks of the trade back then. And then, he didn't really even, I mean, there's questions whether or not he graduated from college without, paying for it and all of these types of things. And so for having not been held accountable his entire life, and then we work all of these different things that we could talk about for hours, J6, potentially stealing the election, this, that, and the other, the Supreme Court, to enable a guy like this as a transactional person for the billionaire class to be inserted into the presidency and then made immune to the law is beyond anybody's wildest comprehension. But it's playing out in front of our face every moment, the incompetence, not just of Donald Trump, but his entire cabinet, the change of the Secretary of War, it's the Secretary of Defense, and we could go on and on and on. But for someone who has been, your entire life, shall we say, schematic, the scaffolding of your existence, right? Doesn't it feel like it's all been thrown in the garbage? In a way, it what my friend likes to call, to reference Mel Brooks, ludicrous speed. But here you are, and thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of people are rising. But what are the pros and cons given the threat level and then where we're at based on what you've seen? I wonder how you kind of compartmentalize that.
I honestly think that the people are the only ones who are going to stop this. I I mean, maybe at midterms something will happen, but I don't think the outcome of the midterms will happen the way we want it without the people, right? Like,
Has to be enormous.
yep, that is the lever of power that we need to regain, is one, if not both, of the other branches, so that there is that check put back into place. And everyone's aware of that. Both sides are very aware of how important these elections are going to be. And so the importance of the people showing up never, ever has it been, the stakes have not been this high in my lifetime.
I don't think they've ever been.
Right. And what I'd say is, but it's also important how people show up. And I cannot stress enough the importance of showing up peacefully, because at every turn they are trying to paint us as attacking ICE, as violent, as the crazy. So discredit the entire movement by putting this idea that we're Antifa and all of these other things. And I think the part of why the movement has been so successful is because those labels haven't worked for them. It's one of the things I've been really happy to see is, as our movement has grown, it is much more a mix of young and old. And I think that's really important. I think originally it was more old people, because we recognized, I think, early on how dangerous this was. And I think it's really important that it is a mix. I think that it's hard for them to label them as Antifa when it's a bunch of people who look like me. And then I think that conversely, they recognize when they start to see more young people in the group that they're they're not attracting new voters, which is hugely important in this process of voting, right? We've watched all these high school students, even across Utah, in quite rural places, kids walking out over ICE in protest. So I think that it's really important to show up. It's really important to show up peacefully. One of the things we're going to be introducing in this march, and it will be a march this time, not just a rally, we'll be going from Washington Square, which is downtown, up to our Capitol. And we're going to bring in the singing resistance movement. And part of the strategy behind that is people singing is a lot less threatening than people chanting. And it's actually incredibly powerful in terms of drawing people in. And right now, that's part of our job, is to draw more and more people into this movement and into this moment, and recognize their responsibility to our democracy. It is, this isn't a spectator sport this time. We really need people to step up and do more than they've ever been asked to do. And honestly, if you respond to that call, I think what you'll find is hope and courage and a community that is really vested in other people and in helping one another. And I think that's what we saw in Minneapolis. I think that's why we were all so moved by it. I think that's why they were successful in so many ways. And, we just all really need to study what happened in Minneapolis and replicate that in our communities, because it is how we will survive this.
I'm a big fan of music, and my whole life, and especially political music, for example. And I know the Dropkick Murphys showed up in Salt Lake City last summer, and because of Minneapolis, I was pretty amazed to see Bruce Springsteen and U2, the two of the biggest, super recognized, whatever you want to refer to them as, but obviously musicians and bands and that sort of thing, that span decades. But for them to, turn around songs relatively short order about the movement really was a huge indication to me, right? And we need more of that, and we need much more of that, because, the biggest challenge, of course, is misinformation, too much information. I'm trying to show my cell phone and it's not showing up. And people being hyper focused, right, into a place where they can be manipulated all day, every day, right? And so when you come out together, it becomes this uplifting and this awakening and this, wonderful camaraderie about, a value system that we all share and that we all have to rise for, particularly in light of the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, for democracy and freedom and separation. It's just unbelievable. It's almost cosmic, the darkness. And I don't want to turn into the darkness, because I do feel your hope, but I thought it might be interesting to get your take on some of these horrific revelations, all things Epstein and the Epstein class.
Well, I have to say, I was one of the people who made fun of QAnon's idea that there was this ring of pedophiles. I guess it seems so far-fetched to me. But as we're finding out, that's weirdly some kind of power play, I guess, to abuse children sexually. And it should be more than disgusting. It's illegal. And it's strange that it's being treated. And I say this, it's not just treated that way on a national level. our state is full of the same attitude about sexual abuse of minors. And it's hard to put into words how that harms and how that harm continues for generations.
The corrosiveness and the evil of it, but the banality and the hypocrisy by those who claim to be, somewhat religiously oriented or Christian oriented, primarily
Right.
in our culture. I, there's no way, and this is a judgment call, that they've ever believed in what they've read. They can't. Not if they support this and look the other way. I mean, it's just, but again, strange things happen in cults, do they not? We've seen this throughout history, right?
Yeah.
And so complicity and conformity is a human trait to power, and we all know, at least I have in my work throughout the centuries, that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I've also learned the other side, that when a group of men discover plunder, they create a legal code to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it. That stems from 17th century France. Think about that. That was several hundred years ago, in imperialism, that sets this sort of tone for this like strong authoritarian grip that everybody conforms to, but using the most horrific human capacity to predate for an under sort of girding in the shadows. So again, maybe to move forward, but just, if you want to comment further, that's great. But from where I'm sitting, it's the lawlessness. And that's what everybody is now starting to recognize. There's two sets of laws, which is an impossibility for a democracy that's of, by, and for
Right.
the people. When you have what we call the elite, which aren't elite, they're just above the law, and they turned out to be, you could insert your favorite adjective as a verb, and consider how, to your point about being in the Navy and honor and principle and everything, to becoming what, an extension of a mob state that's going to just knock people off, and from a guy that never served in the military. I mean, all of these things.
Right.
It's like, I guess the question I have to ask you on the heels of that, to try to generate uplift hope, is the notion of character and principle. What does that mean to you?
In the time we're experiencing right now, I think it has been devalued, and there's a lot of this both sides, oh well, both sides do this. And I think sadly that is how we got here. This false equivalency is, we've never seen anyone do what Donald Trump is doing. There is no equivalent in my lifetime. And the Epstein is just a piece of it. That's what we have to digest, is that is just a piece of it. Then, you look at his crypto company and the way he sold all this stuff in the chips and all this stuff to the UEA, and it's just unreal.
Yeah, that
What
nobody's
he,
stopping him. Yeah.
yeah. And so to watch, I mean, to me, he is a very sick man.
Yeah.
And part of his sickness is he is a pathological liar.
Yeah.
And what that means is he doesn't know what truth is.
Nope.
And you can see that when he's being interviewed. He's not really lying. He doesn't know truth. He is so deep in his lies.
Yeah, he cheats at golf in front of people. He's cheated on everybody he's ever done business with, right? This isn't, think about the power in the shadows by the billionaire class that have tapped into the hatred of the other that's been there all along, as you all know, right? And so they're all making a Faustian bargain where it's like, okay, we're going to make believe that, everything is Orwell, right? Every accusation is a confession. And it goes on and on and on, to the point that it is just literally, it's this rotting, just systemic, horrific corruption of everything this country stands for. And you and your team and everybody that you have activated are saying, no, no, we don't accept this. And see, your courage and your hope amidst this reminds me of some of the greatest stories in Hollywood fiction, right? Or biblical stuff. I mean, it's the good and the evil, and the good will prevail. We know that. The light will break through the darkness. But, to what extent and how difficult it becomes to endure really depends on a lot of things. And I guess before I move into the last part of this, it is really amazing, ICE, all things considered, as an extension of this. You know, can you kind of bring it full circle from your personal slash activist role, indivisible, national indivisible, within the context of ICE, as well as we project towards the elections? Your thoughts on what this means and how collectively the organization is addressing it.
Well, I honestly, I think the organization is recognizing the power of people and trying to activate as many people in this moment as they can. And activation has lots of different entry points. It doesn't mean you have to march. It doesn't mean you have to picket someone. I have a person who just handles the new members that come in on our Facebook page, and she can do that from her home, right? There are lots of ways to get involved, and activism, honestly, hope is a weapon. And when I say that, it means you can get involved with Catholic community services and help in one of the soup kitchens, and that's activism right now. That is standing with people who are under attack. It is standing with the people who are most being harmed right now, and it is probably one of the most important things we do to maintain our united peace. It's so important, and so I think that it is the fabric of our country to stand together and to stand up when someone's being harmed. And it's happening all across our state as well. Because I'm involved with some of I don't go out and do a lot of the ICE work, but I'm involved with, we have to stop the detention center. And so now I'm in way too many signal chats. But I hear stories from all over the state that are really inspiring. And I think that, even developing relationships with your neighborhoods, within your neighborhood, that is a form of resistance. And I think it's important for us to realize that collective power and to tap into it and to know we will come out of this, and to have hope that we will come out of it better than we went in, because our system was broken going in. I don't think any of us would have done what's been done to it. And I think most of us recognize we aren't going back, that they have damaged it to an extent that we need to rethink it. And to me, there's hope in that. We can rebuild something better, because we know most of us know at least part of what was wrong, right? So I think our system was built on inequality. That's a big piece of what's wrong. And now we've gotten to this, as you said, we have this billionaire class. The underpinning has been there for a very long time in our country. And maybe we should be grateful that we're actually being forced to acknowledge it and to work through it.
And what's so absolutely incredible as you were delivering that last piece, the light literally came on your face in a way that you were like radiating the light, which is so incredible. And I think
It's
that
right in my front window.
is a wonderful opportunity for me to move into the next section. But if you want to change your the light on you, feel free. I'm going to put a quick pause. So I was really, I don't know, inspired by the whole thing, right? I mean, just what I'm feeling is just the right ethos in the approach. But I do have to ask you this question, um, because it's a bit of a frustrating question, right? Because you've been in the trenches and you look at a lot of things from a micro standpoint and reacting in a way that you have to, which is part of this whole process, right? But at the same time, we all know that, for example, as we were talking about, Epstein or wars or all of these things, these didn't begin with Trump. He wasn't the mastermind of a lot of stuff. Now, he's a purveyor of making things worse. There's no question about it. But as some of these things that we've seen, we know there's been a long march towards a big problem that we have to rectify because this is the moment to do it, because this is the crossroads. Because if we don't get it right, you know, we're going to slip even further into authoritarianism and wherever that leads, right? Like my biggest fear personally is that, you know, hostilities secede in the Middle East and Trump gets emboldened by being the bully, the global bully that he is, with nobody stopping him. And he just turns, ice even up further, right? As the midterms approach, something to that effect, to maintain martial law, which is what a lot of us have been concerned about. And of course, what you addressed earlier as it relates to responding the right way, right? So I have been involved, as you well know, with a platform that I want to address to you, and I want to kind of get some feedback based on where you're coming from, and also use it as potentially to reach other people out there to understand that there's a lot of different initiatives that are going to happen with the Democratic Party. Obviously, you said that our political process is complicated. We have primaries, we have different issues in Utah that are different than Florida, that are different than, I mean, we're a huge country, and yet we have to take back the House. Every seat is available, right? And I think half the Senate is available. And we know that people, I think millions are going to show up, but they're going to sabotage every which way to Sunday everything they can, just like they did in Texas, right? Cut off the booth right at 7, try to somehow prevent the minority votes from being counted, and all other manner, shape, or form of this type of stuff that, is just diabolical in terms of manipulating the outcome one way or the other. Might not be absolute cheating, but it is, but it isn't. But, there's more, right? We saw insanity in the last election. So I guess one question I want to ask you from where you're sitting, have you seen either come up through Indivisible, not to put you on the spot about Indivisible, but just as a reference, or let's just say the DNC, any, shall we say, response requisite to corruption that has given you, shall we say, I don't know, an Obama like moment in 2008 where it was like, okay, that's our guy. This guy's talking for all of us. This is a groundswell. We can all get behind this. Do you get that sense now?
No. But I'm also going to say Obama came out of nowhere. For those who don't remember, he was a very junior senator, and I actually got to meet him when he came to Park City for a fundraiser. And I remember I had relatives visiting from Germany, and I said to him, "Oh, most people think he's a terrorist instead of a person running for president because of his name, and he doesn't have a chance." And that was, I mean, and I took them to meet him, and hilariously, they all got pictures with him. And when he won, apparently they got poster size their pictures blown up and put in their living or in their homes. But often leaders don't, I think we tend to focus on people like Gavin Newsom, who are in power and who are in the limelight a lot. But some of the greatest leaders don't come to power through that process. And I mean, Truman was a good example of that too, right? So I think that it doesn't mean they aren't there. It just means we haven't seen them yet. And the moment we're in could have a lot to do with that.
Right. Well, suppression, all sorts of different things, but really primarily money, in my opinion, because of what I've seen the last 20 years by way of this billionaire class as an incredibly effective way of making sure they know how to pipeline who they want in, like we talked about previously, and with Burgess and among others, right, all over the country. I mean, come on, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and then you guys see or George Santos and all of these jokers who know nothing about Congress, the ways of means of Congress. They're there to be people that pull the party line and do the echo chamber stuff in the most obnoxious way possible. And then you jam up the system and the system can't work. That's what I've observed. And as a result of that, I've been in the long haul of developing a paradigmatic answer that is the answer to corruption, which is what I identify as the single most causality of everything else that's created the fascism. In fact, I think that I saw a meme the other day that said that fascism is capitalism in decay or something to that effect. And that's the corrosive nature, which it is, especially if you think about predatory capitalism, which is exactly gangsterism, okay? Especially when you understand monopolies and that sort of thing. So I don't want to lecture you. At the same time, I wanted to kind of get your sense of a reaction to that opening statement as I lead into this. And I wonder what your reaction to that is when I say that there has to be a paradigmatic approach to this insane corruption that we're now in.
Absolutely. I think that what often happens to a party who doesn't have power is you become the party of no. You're constantly pushing back on it against an agenda, so you become the party of no, and you don't really develop a platform. You're just trying to stop all this bad stuff.
Right.
And
right, exactly.
We do need to look forward. We do need a very strong platform, and I do think I see it developing in some sense. It's it's affordable health care, affordability in general. I think you're hearing that a lot in the campaigns.
Absolutely, there's no question.
That's honestly, that's a response to the voters, because that's not a great think tank idea. you
right.
know
Well, but reality is reality. But that is the thing that's undergirding, and what it's always been, especially going back to Clinton. It's the economy, stupid, and pocketbook issues and dinner table issues and that sort of thing, which really a lot of people can relate to on both sides of the political divide, right? So it's something that cuts right to the quick. And to your point, or to my point, kind of blended with that, is that what I am suggesting, and I want to introduce to you, is as a result of my work over many, many years, there's a lot of things that people can't see in the party of no and reacting because you can't fight on your heels. You have to understand the system. And like you said earlier, you can't fix what you don't understand. And so that takes a lot of effort with a lot of incredible information. And because of my work with a lot of incredibly smart people, I've been able to develop this platform. But it's in response to what I describe as Trump is the ultimate, shall we say, expression of everything that's been in the shadows for now decades. And so what he's done is created this giant sandwich of just evil and all of the things we've described today. And he's shoving it down everybody's throat like waterboarding torture. So nobody can stay in silos anymore. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you were a scientist with some research grant that just got cut because of some sort of a funding issue from Doge, on down the line, where nobody is safe from this situation. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to just introduce briefly the Clean New Deal, and I'm going to share my screen. And the platform here, and I was going to try to do a little bit of a question and answer with you from a standpoint that I want to introduce first the precepts of the Clean New Deal, but I'm going to make some declarative statements and just to kind of have you marinate on them as we're going forward. Now, what you do on a daily basis is show that democracy is still alive because you're in the trenches, you fight every day, you're with people, you're activists, so that matters. But for the most part, in terms of the federal government, by way of what's happened with Project 2025 and them taking over both houses of Congress, as well as SCOTUS, as well as media, quite frankly, as we've seen with all these mergers and acquisitions, my position is we don't live in a democracy. But the key component here is we no longer operate as a free market. That's the key that I'm going to reveal to everyone. We don't have a free market capitalistic system. We have monopoly gangsterism for the corporate fascist. That sounds like a loaded term, but that's the way I define it. The law is unequal. We know the law is in the toilet at the moment. We know that corruption rules everything. Millions are beginning to understand the threat of Project 2025. So the Clean New Deal is democracy's answer. I know those are all loaded, and I want to address those with you briefly, but I want in a moment. But I want to introduce the precepts of the Clean New Deal first. So the way I set this up, you remember when we were younger, a lot of us, at least my generation, like to play with Rubik's Cube. And when you put the whole Rubik's Cube together, you got all the sides together, there was a eureka. It's like there was a major accomplishment. So the way I present this to the American people is that the Rubik's Cube of our reality, no matter where you are on the spectrum, how much you know, there's a lot you've been taught that isn't real. And what we have to do is recreate our understanding of the paradigm, because that's what I've had to do with my work as a documentary filmmaker, because I did believe the law was equal. I did believe we had, you know, professionals in power with character that would always uphold integrity. I believed that 14 years ago. I've seen a slippery slope to this Trump moment as a result of people making mistakes in different parties, on both parties, every step of the way. So I want to set this up by just giving you the four pieces of what I say is the Rubik's Cube that gets us into the precepts of the Clean New Deal. So first, I ask the question, what is qualified immunity? Are you comfortable asking that question? Are you familiar with qualified immunity?
Well, I know, like, and I don't have, our police officers have it.
They can, basically what happens is they can shoot to kill and not be held accountable. So it really developed because of insurance, and they don't want to bankrupt counties and
Right.
cities and that sort of thing. But what happens is if you get a cop that might be with bad intent, he can get away with murder, which led to a lot of things that ultimately became Black Lives Matter, among other things. And it happens, and it has been happening for a long time. But the qualified immunity also just laid itself out bare when we had Stephen Miller, who I haven't seen for 2 months, by the way, and then all of the Trump administration, and of course everybody's favorite got voted off the island and got fired, Kristi Noem, last week. But they were pressing forward on qualified immunity for ICE in the cases of Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy. So that correlation has just gotten worse, has it not?
Correct.
Okay, so that's only possible because of judicial immunity at SCOTUS, who have etch-a-sketched the Constitution, have taken backdoor bribes, have worked with all of the major players in the ways that we've seen great journalists reveal about Clarence Thomas, Justice Alito, the Roberts Court, Kegerator Kavanaugh, which is a joke to say it in its own right. But all of the things that side of the Roberts Court has all been created by Mitch McConnell's long game and the billionaire class. Would you disagree with that, or would you say that's pretty accurate?
I think that's pretty accurate.
And they're above the law. And since they're above the law with lifelong appointments where they can actually etch a sketch the Civil War with the 14th Amendment, Section 3, as one of many examples, to allow this president, who we all saw was involved with the insurrection on J6. That was as clear as day to anybody who wasn't buying the Kool-Aid from Fox. And we created presidential immunity because of the Supreme Court, because they also allow qualified immunity. Do we see a trend here? Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Immunity.
Right? And immunity, exactly. And is that all antithetical to the American Revolution and the United States and the Constitution? I mean, it's a silly question, right? But you would agree with that all of this stuff is what we're actually dealing with, right?
Right.
Okay. So the
Absolutely.
final piece of the four questions that I ask is another part of that is gerrymandering, but the Electoral College. And I like to point out because our neighbor state to the west, Wyoming, has an exorbitant amount of billionaires that have probably as much legislative influence in the state of California. There's 600,000 people in Wyoming, and there's 50 million people in California, and that's one of many ways the Electoral College can circumnavigate the majority. So I put this into the equation to just understand the nature of absolute power by the minority. Would you say that's tracking with our reality at the moment?
Mhm.
So I think they can all be fixed and remedied. And the way we do that is with the Clean New Deal. Now, when you go forward into the Clean New Deal, everything I have discovered is predicated on money. Money controls our system. And the first thing that I discovered and I explored in my work, The Con, as you know, I'm a documentary filmmaker and a producer, but after 14 years, I discovered with professionals, and I can make my links available down below in the description, but we discovered a massive, the largest racketeering enterprise in the history of the world. Our financial system, which a lot of people call predatory capitalism, has become a casino baked in racketeering. Now, that's a lot to throw at people. All you need to be aware of is they break millions of laws, and they have over the course of the last 14 years. But here's the biggest part of it: none of them have been held accountable. We're talking the too big to fail banks, we're talking hedge funds, we're talking about asset managers, we're talking about liquid assets. These are the systems within the financial system that have the most power in our nation because they have the money to pay for campaigns. And I've learned the lowest return on investment is a corrupt politician. And so, what I set forth here is we've got to create a new modern day Glass-Steagall Act. Now, I'm not going to go into a whole repertoire of a lecture about what Glass-Steagall was, but I will say that we know how finance works. If you align interests and you hold bad players accountable, you don't get gambling with other people's money. We learned that back in 1933 after the Great Depression, and we had 70 years of stability until we deregulated, starting with the Clinton administration, that got worse and created Trump, and then has slipped us into the situation where we have provided tens of trillions of dollars illegally to this financial system that has train wrecked the world. That's where you get the affordability crisis. That's where you get the disparity of wealth. And what we need to do to rectify that is to create a new Glass-Steagall that aligns interests. But here's the most important part: never again shall we, the American people, allow the financial system to work an end round to where tens of trillions of dollars can be given to the grifters when we know they're guilty of racketeering. Would you say that, would make sense?
Mhm.
Okay, so for those who might be scratching your head like, no, that didn't happen, it happened. And I can go on for hours and hours and hours to explain how. I have a television series. I'll provide a link. You can check that out. But we've given tens of trillions of dollars illegally to the guys that created, the Epstein class and created Trump. That's the bottom line. It explains everything. And the other side of that is what we've all heard Bernie Sanders talk about, as well as AOC. We have to end Citizens United. That is something you're probably pretty familiar with, I would imagine, Sarah.
Yeah.
So
I mean, everything they warned us would happen is happened.
the dark money out of politics, and I always use the metaphor that ask any victim of P. Diddy who got roofied in the shadows if anything good happens in the dark. No, I mean, guys, we need transparency, honesty. Systems need to work. Systems need to work to where bad guys can't lie and get free money illegally by destroying other people. That would all make sense, don't you think?
Mhm.
That's the clean New Deal. The third part of it is we hear, and you've prefaced earlier, the likes of Medicare for all, or ending systemic racism in prison, or creating a renewable energy paradigm. Those are things, particularly, that Democrats have always supported, or at least progressive Democrats. But at the same time, one big question always comes up: how are you going to pay for that? Would you agree with that?
Mhm.
The fact is, money is not the issue. We've given tens of trillions of dollars illegally to villains of finance that are all completely corrupt, that have corrupted and bankrupted our system, but they still have access. And anytime anybody wants to call me or reach out to me or discuss this, especially if you're running for office, I have all the receipts. I know exactly who did what, when, and how. In fact, it's all in this document here that I'll create a link below, and I'll show you where you can find it briefly. But the bottom line is the starting number is the $71 trillion that we gave to this evil Epstein class. And I'm so glad Ro Khanna came up with that, because I thought that was a very effective way to talk to describe this billionaire looting on a global basis. We gave them tens of trillions of dollars illegally. And of course, what's going to happen if you give a criminal, endless amounts of money and no accountability?
Criminal enterprise.
They're going to keep. Is Donald Trump's administration a racketeering enterprise
Yes.
and a pedophilia protection racket?
Yeah.
See, we couldn't say that 2 years ago. Now it's absolutely clear, right? This is exactly how Donald Trump has done us a favor, because I don't think anybody in their right mind would ever accept that if they understood the realities of it. The bottom line is, if we can get a movement with the Clean New Deal, once you understand you've got to purge corruption, you got to recreate the system the way it was developed before we created deregulation for these criminals, and that we have tens of trillions of dollars, then can we get to work with the Congress on our side to develop Medicare for all and renewable energy platforms and other elements like improving education, science research, and all of those things that those of us who are educated believe in. Is that something that would make sense to you?
Absolutely.
So moving down, addressing the Supreme Court, easier said than done. But if we could have a groundswell with everybody on the same page, we have got to do everything we can to expand the Supreme Court to 13 justices to outmaneuver the Roberts Court. Is that something that sounds at least hopeful downstream?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the starting places, if that's too high end, is that we need to put age limits. I mean, we're
Okay,
having people die in office.
true.
And so maybe we just need to establish age limits for all of these positions. Let's
That's a
get
great
some
point.
ageism going.
That's a great point. But at the same time, that brings me back to the four questions, because what we are demanding is to end the idea that anybody is above the law. We have to end qualified immunity. We have to end judicial immunity. We have to end presidential immunity. Those are the three branches of tyranny. When they can lie between each other and not be held accountable,
Right.
we are no longer the United States of America. And so, to your point, yes, I believe that we can have, shall we say, gatherings and things that move forward, but there is no time, and we have to build the plane while we're flying it if we address the reality of corruption. Because we all know on the Democratic side that there's the revolving door senior Dems that have ties to all of this money that haven't fixed this over 20 years. So why would they now? That's where I'm coming from. I have to say them out loud. Chuck Schumer stood in front of the Epstein victims during the People's State of the Union and showed his complete, wholehearted support of the Epstein victims. And I was looking at my watch going, it's 2026. Where were you 15 years ago? Where were all of the people who had this information?
Well, I have to say, I don't know, Patrick, do you? I find myself in a little bit of a like, wow, I read the rape suit by this 13-year-old when Trump was running the first time.
Yeah.
I read about the Epstein place in Santa Fe and how he thought he should be procreating to repopulate
Niner babies.
at the same time. And I think, and now people are just like, it's kind of this weird, I guess there is a lot of information out there, but he was running for president and people just ignored that. because that was out there when he ran the first time. That is not new news.
Right. None of this was new. Not to mention the fact that Donald Trump has been a criminal for decades and involved with criminal activities. But a lot of this is media normalizing Trump. And that's another part of the oligarchic class, right? Because they've taken over Congress, the Supreme Court. And now, as we've seen, and this isn't new either, but it might be new to a lot of people, private equity, hedge funds, asset managers, they've all bought media over the course of the last 20 years. The latest version of these mega billionaires like Larry Ellison and so on and so forth with these mega mergers, remember, it wasn't maybe 6 years ago that you could have a merger and acquisition this large. There was all sorts of, antitrust violations and this, that, and the other, but they've just destroyed all of it. And then when Trump finally got in, he got rid of all of the law. He got rid of the IGs. He got rid of the DOJ. He made the DOJ his own personal law firm. Guys, we're at the end of the road of decades and decades of this billionaire effort. And by the way, our neighbors to the east, Adolf Coors, he was very much involved with the Heritage Foundation from the very beginning. These guys have been around for decades. They've been planning this for decades.
A long game.
Yeah, and if we don't have a commitment to beating them at their own game, I don't think we're ever going to get another shot, at least in our lifetimes. That's what's on the line, at least in my opinion. And so I get to the final pieces of the puzzle here. Number 8 is to institute term limits, like you said, for the U.S. senators and representatives. Happy to add the Supreme Court to that. And then finally, prohibit all insider trading for all members of the Senate, House Representative, the Supreme Court. Marjorie Taylor Greene is being levied a hero because of her being on the side of the Epstein victims. But meanwhile, she also has made $27 million in the last 6 years while being in Congress.
Yeah,
that's one heck of a golden parachute, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that's the clean New Deal. My question to you, my friend, given everything that you heard just now, does some of that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that again, it kind of circles back to the idea that there is opportunity in this moment, and it isn't all doom and gloom.
Yeah, it's okay. So I had to turn on my light, so I apologize for my.
I know, I'm realizing it got really dark. We've talked a long time.
Sure. Well, we're at the conclusion of this, and the bottom line is I want to thank you so much for your time, because really it is all about hope, but it's defined hope. I remember when Obama came in, he was riding the white horse of hope and change we could believe in. He had what do we like to say? He had a mandate by the American people, right? And ultimately, what did he do? He kept it vague, and he put all the bad guys in power that created the madness. That was what created that. As opposed to, nope, we got to have an FDR moment, which is the New Deal. That's why we developed the Clean New Deal. It's all predicated. And if anybody has any questions or concerns about specificity, if you go to my website, I put the white papers that have all of the documentation, the cited evidence, all of the different videos that will take you to a whole potpourri of information that has been suppressed, quite frankly, by the American media since all of this happened 14 years ago. We've been flying blind for 14 years. The result is Donald Trump. And if we don't turn the tables on Donald Trump now, we're not going to, but we will, and we can, and we're going to, because we have a plan. And on that note, people like Sarah Buck are people that make it happen every single day.
Right back at you, Patrick. Your work has, if you guys haven't had a chance to watch the con, it's complex, but it's also it really does lay out what happened in the financial crisis,
which was the largest racketeering effort in the history of the world. And when you realize, by the way, Donald Trump was up to his eyeballs in every single aspect of it. And by the way, so was Jeffrey Epstein. And oh yeah, by the way, so was Vladimir Putin. All of this stuff germinated from there. And that's why we're in this situation. Sarah, we're running out of light, so I'm going to say good night. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful trip. I'll get you this concert. And all the best to everybody involved with Indivisible. Thank you so much.
Thank you too, Patrick. Be well.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.